people in the future.
There are no people.
There are no people in the future.
No people at all.
There are no people in the future.
Where did all my people go?
There are no people in the future.
Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. It is Monday, February 14th, 2022. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Out to Coop Live. Yes, this is a special afternoon edition of Out to Coop Live. More love for this Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody out there. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. On Out to Coop Live, we talk to progressives, activists, writers, and troublemakers of all sorts, right from our own backyards and from across the country. On Fridays, we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. And you got to check out that Wednesday show with Cyril Michaleko. Cyril's a progressive columnist for the Bucks County Courier-Times and the Intelligencer, and now the Bucks County Beacon as well. And he joins me every couple weeks or so to break down, say, what's happening in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and international politics. You can get all our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can help support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rrcpress and choose your membership level. You can also, I'm sounding like someone I feel like I'm on an airplane now, and choose your membership level. How about that? You can also join our Discord. Information on how to do that is right there in the show notes for today. And you can help support the show by heading on over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. And smash that subscribe button, like the stream for the show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. And for more PA Progressive Talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream every night at 9 p.m. He's got a weekend show too as well. He streams pretty much everywhere. Head on over to thericksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms, where you can find his live call-in show for WBAI in New York. All that info is there. Check out his show. He's blowing up right now. It's fantastic. And you got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. Yes, they are in season 2. The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house, and they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter, and subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. And attention gamers, the Game Inn is a Quakertown-based, black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything from retro N64s, latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, you got it. And kids get discounts for every on the report card. How about that? Check them out on their Facebook page. Follow them on Twitter at The Game Inn. That's with 2 N's. If you got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, shoot them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. They're just awesome folks. Got to check them out. And special shout out once again goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongADayman, again with 2 N's, at SongADayman on Twitter. Well, on today's show, I am absolutely thrilled to be welcoming Stephen Caruso to the show. Stephen is the House reporter for the Pennsylvania Capital Star, and he previously covered Pennsylvania state government for the PLS Reporter. Like, he's been covering everything that's going on in Harrisburg. He's like the insider reporter. He's got everything, got all the details, no pressure. Now, Stephen's going to be joining me today to talk about redistricting, voting, and maps, and more maps. Yes, indeed. So there's so much kind of going on with what's happening in terms of our representation. Once again, the PA Supreme Court will be drawing Pennsylvania's congressional maps or choosing among maps. And after deep divisions between Republicans and Democrats could not be bridged and coming to some sort of kind of consensus, Pennsylvania continues to play a critical role in the balance of power in the House of Representatives. And new state legislative maps were approved last week, and however, some additional controversies there remain. For example, some Lehigh Valley Latino leaders are saying the new maps dilute the influence of Latino voters. We're going to kind of jump into that too as well. We'll get into all of this and more on today's show, and you can follow Stephen Caruso on Twitter at StephenJ_Caruso. That's at StephenJ_Caruso. Welcome to the show, Stephen. How you doing, man?
I'm doing all right, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, I'm so thrilled. And like I said, we're talking about this before the show, is I'm so thrilled to have you on today because, I periodically get, and it's been kind of kind of concentrated over the past couple of weeks to, where people are just having kind of questions or just confusions about actually what is actually happening in the redistricting process. There's been kind of pictures of maps flying around. I know that you are kind of quite the connoisseur of maps yourself.
Yes. They have been everything I have been looking at for the past 3 months, and I kind of just want to like have a map vacation very soon. But no, I think you kind of nailed it, Kevin. Like, a lot of this is in courts, and that's kind of the thing I feel like I have to tell people whenever I get questions, because I also get questions in my DMs on Twitter, emails. A lot of it right now is just kind of in a holding pattern, waiting for the state Supreme Court to come in and make a lot of decisions. They have to decide on what the congressional map is going to be. They're going to be charged with giving a final approval to the state House and Senate maps, and they're also, because of the huge amount of accumulated delays we've seen in census data, partisan divides, then some changes to the data as well, like on getting rid of not counting people in prison at that prison site and drawing the maps. That's prison gerrymandering, it's often referred to. Getting rid of that. All of this took a lot of time. And time that now the courts are going to have to look at, and with the primary approaching, with the ability of people to get on the for candidates to get on the ballot now kind of up, like hard to do. Like, all of this has to be settled, and all of it's going to be settled at the state Supreme Court.
Yeah, and then if I'm correct about this, right, we're going to hear arguments for this on Friday, the 18th, correct?
Yeah, they're going to hear arguments on the congressional maps. So,
on the congressional maps, right.
Specifically congressional maps. There's still, I believe people have until like March 6th. I know it's a Sunday to file objections to the state house maps, state legislative maps, which is, like I said, whole different set of maps. So just to kind of start off, when we talk about congressional maps, that's referring to the 17, because now it will be 17, the 17 people who Pennsylvania elects in districts to go to DC and represent the state in Congress. And then the legislative maps, those are maps that elect to 253 people who come to Harrisburg, and who are my main responsibility to keep track of what they're doing when they come here to pass a budget or all the other things they can do. Just to kind of make that clear, because I know that's often
I appreciate
has
that.
to be explained.
Exactly, and that's one of the things I wanted to actually, do exactly what you just did, right? Make those distinctions really clear, because I think some people get confused, right? At least in conversations I have with folks, is precisely because you got these two new sets of maps, and they're both kind of going to the Supreme Court at this point. Is that where we are?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court is 100% deciding what the congressional map is going to be, because Tom Wolf and the General Assembly had the whole fall to try and negotiate something, but for a multitude of reasons they didn't. Like I said, so we start in fall because I'm going to go back even further, just like the way it's out. So redistricting has to be done because of new census data. New census data says where people live now. That census data was delayed because of COVID. Also, the Trump administration was trying to not count, as America always has, was trying to not count undocumented immigrants in the total. Like, they only want to count citizens. And if you do that, you're once again going to take some weight away from cities where a lot of times undocumented people might be living, and move it. So like rural folks, white folks, most likely Republican voters are, they're going to be kind of biased in the count. That would just shift representation towards them. The Trump administration wanted to do this, and they weren't able to for a multitude of reasons. But their attempt to do that delayed the data even more, which is needed to draw these new maps. So Pennsylvania, everyone was talking about redistricting in early 2021 because it was important, but no one was able to do anything until fall. So from like September until January, September of 2021 to January of this year, Governor Tom Wolf, who's a Democrat, and the Republicans in the General Assembly just sort of like sniffing each other out. They didn't do it. They didn't negotiate at all. As far as I can tell, there was very little talk. Yeah, there's very little talk. So Wolf basically just put out some qualifications for a map before Christmas or before Thanksgiving. It was just like, this is what I expect a map to be. I expect it to have a transparent process. I want you to basically be able to almost like a professor. I want you to be able to explain every single district to me. I want you to be able to have a write-up saying why you made this district the way it is. He also wanted the districts to like reflect the fact that Pennsylvania is this like 50-50 state. You know, a lot of times the state elections are pretty close. Like this is a swing state, you know, a swing commonwealth. And I think that and Wolf made clear like he wanted it to anyone could take, like kind of like anyone could have a majority of the seats from the state, and the districts sort of reflect that. And then Republicans, for their part, promise this like transparent process, because the Republicans, like a map is implemented. It's basically drawn by legislative leaders, passed like a normal bill, and it has to go to Tom Wolf to sign it.
Right.
And so, you know, they both have to play a role here. And Republicans said, we're going to have a transparent process. They had a dozen plus hearings before they released a map. They opened it up to citizen input. But this is definitely where it gets tricky, is like what I would say as someone who is observing the process is, well, what advocates point out is that it's very easy to have hearings when you just have people talk at you. Or like, I hope you keep Allentown and Bethlehem together. Like, you know, I hope that you keep Harrisburg and York together. Like, that's kind of easy to just go and do.
Right.
The hard part's having hearings after you put out a map, which Republicans... there was only one hearing, I believe, or two hearings after a map was selected. So the point is, they did a lot of this front work where they just went around and said, tell us what you think about what a map should be. And then they said people can submit maps to us. But like that whole process was hard to use. People who draw maps, like that's their main activism, said the system was hard to use. There was this like hidden requirement where all of your districts have to be perfectly equal in population. If you'll excuse me as I nerd out for a second,
No,
like this is just this is important because, like, you know, like congressional districts divide by like that one person, one vote precedent we have from way back in the 60s. That's kind of, you know, it comes from the civil rights era, the voting rights era.
Right.
That there's this requirement that, you know, everyone's vote is equal, because districts used to be like you could have one district have like 10,000 more people and one have 10,000 less people. And like, you know, so each person's vote in that scenario isn't really the same. And like usually there'd be a ton of like districts that had way more people than necessary, well,
Right.
filled with black people and voters and black voters. And it was a way to disenfranchise people.
Yep.
So we have this precedent that says one person, one vote. So technically congressional districts all have to be within like 1, 2, 3 people of each other. But even like, but like what Republicans made is that they have to be perfectly equal. Like there is no differences down to like I can't quote the last digit at you of how big our congressional districts have to be, but it's something in the 700,000 range. And even like going from zero differentiation to like 1 is a big difference, how you can divide stuff up. And the Republicans said, no, if your district, if it's not 0, we're not going to consider it, more or less. And
well, I thought, you know, on this point, that point right there, which I found interesting, is that the map that they're kind of holding up that was drawn by the what's her name, Amanda Holt, right?
Yes.
Who's a Republican, right? She even says in that piece in part of your reporting, right? She even came out and said, like, yeah, I probably could have drawn maps differently that would have had different if the requirements weren't so strict, because there were some weird quips in the way that you could draw these things, the requirements that made things a little bit more difficult to work with.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I want to hammer about this is like, I'm not going to take away from the legislative Republicans the fact that they had this transparent sort of process. They had a lot of hearings. They did pick a citizen submission. Like, you know, I don't know if they did any mapping behind the scenes, but like this was not a map that sort of was just like drawn up by some by a legislative staffer who was getting input from party leaders to like, you know, do the absolute best thing for their party. But it's still like they put these very specific requirements on it. And and also the thing I want to add, I had some reporting on this earlier that I feel like kind of got lost in the shuffle, but like Seth Grove, who ran the Republican process in the House, he had a hearing where the main testifier who was saying, hey, you need to have perfect equality. I can't remember his name, I meant to pull up the story, but he was a Trump nominee for a position in the census office who actually attracted a huge amount of controversy at the time because he had actually published some he had published some studies that said that like competitive elections are bad for democracy, I believe. And like he just made a lot of points that people were worried about, and he never was approved for the census. Also, he was just a political scientist and like political appointee for this position that typically was saved for like career bureaucrats who really understand the census. And then Trump just pulled this guy out of a university in Texas to like slide in, and so he never got approved. So this is to say like that this requirement itself feels very specifically chosen to me, from looking who testified in favor of it. And then, so you have these maps. And then the one that was chosen was drawn by Amanda Holt. She is a Republican, or a former Republican commissioner, maybe current. I think she's been in and out of office. Mm-hmm. I will also say, like, I think there are some, like, Amanda Holt's also been a longtime redistricting advocate. So yes, she's a Republican official, but yes, I feel like her bona fides as a person who cares about redistricting are really can't be questioned in a lot of ways. But this just say, like, her map, which she drew, she was like, it's so weird to say that they should be perfectly equal. I could fix a lot of things if I had more time, or if like you could let there be 1 or 2 people difference, which a lot of states have. A lot of states do sometimes have a 1 or 2 person difference. And and then her map also divided a couple of rural counties, like Blair County, Tioga County, Lebanon County, that are those people from those counties, like state legislators from those counties, sit on Grove's committee, and they, in like one of the only meetings that the House had after the map was chosen, said, we don't like this. Right. Like, we can't vote for this because it splits our small county. Which, look, it makes sense. Like, you're not going to want your county split. Nobody wants to be split. That's kind of the hard part of redistricting. And then, like, they call a vote on the map on Monday. I think that hearing's on a Friday. They call a vote on that map is scheduled for Monday. They just don't even vote on the map that Republicans made a huge to-do about calling up for a vote. They just vote out some, like, empty bills, which is just classic Harrisburg, to, like, say, oh, we can fit something in, later. Then, though, 2 days later, would have been Wednesday, Grove, without workshopping any of these changes, just calls another meeting, brings up this amendment, changes the map so that those counties are no longer split. It splits Dauphin County 3 ways. So, like, this county was already split twice. But yeah, no, it sticks the city of Harrisburg in with, like, York County again, in what would be Scott Perry's district. And I think it, like, puts one part of Dauphin County with, like, Lancaster, and a northern part in with, like, Altoona. So those other splits that everyone else was concerned about go out the window to replace it by just these very clean splits, but that put Dauphin County, asunder. And then that map passes. Now, I think all you have to do is do math. There are 15 Republicans on these committees. Right. If you have 3 defect, you can't pass a bill. And then magically, counties that were keeping 3 people from voting for it get fixed. I mean, and there's no public input on that, really. Right. And then that's the map we've been working with since December.
So that gives us the story. So
sorry,
here's just this is like a kind of like a 10,000 foot question on this one.
Yes, please.
How much of what we've been seeing with these hearings and this back and forth, how much of this is performance that is being done because they basically are saying, look, the Supreme Court's going to decide this anyways. We're not going to do this, so we're going to go and we're going to hold these hearings. I mean, how much of it is kind of people trying to get stuff done, and how much of it is just the kind of the performance and saying, okay, listen, we're just going to kind of like, we're going to throw up our hands ultimately so that we can kind of say, well, the Supreme Court's got to deal with it.
I will say, I think everyone will tell you publicly they were trying to reach good faith agreement. I think many people would agree privately that everyone knew it was heading to court since like November. Because of the delays, because of, like, it just became clear.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it just became clear that, like, the data came in too late. Already, no one really wants to agree. Like most of what the legislature and Wolf can agree on is naming bridges. Like,
Well, they've
let
done a
alone
good
like
job of that, I have to say. They've done a bunch of those.
yeah, like, they can't come up with agreements on small matters of public policy a lot of times. So, like, how are they ever going to agree on, like, something that dictates the balance of power for the next decade? It was going in. I think a lot of us were very like they can try, and sometimes they get a little crafty and they talk behind the scenes, and then out comes this crazy agreement that everyone agrees to. But also, like, that's what advocates didn't want, because usually when that happens, it means someone's getting screwed over.
Right.
Like, they wanted just this transparent, open process, and that also, for better or for worse, I think did provide venue for everyone to be like, oh, we're gonna have all the hearings you want. That lets us grandstand more. We're gonna have our commission come out and give standards for a fair map. We're gonna call in all the redistricting experts to testify before us. Like, it meant there was. I think that's why this process was so confusing to follow. It's just because there was this hope for transparency, everyone was like, we're going to be as transparent as possible, except on, like, things that matter, and the map is just going to kind of, like, putter along until Wolf vetoes it, and it goes to court, and that's where we're at now.
Right. Because, I mean, I was looking at, a few of the things, too, as well. It was interesting, too, you talk about, there's been kind of a pathway in kind of certain kind of legislation, certain kind of way where the agreements happen behind the scenes, but there was pressure upon that this year, right? In part because so much attention is being paid to what's happening with voting rights and so on. So I find it interesting, like when Street out of Philadelphia basically came out because I think we're finding a way of doing this. Like, things exploded. They're like, no.
Yeah,
right? We're not doing this behind the scenes deal where you're going to be able to kind of do something that's going to be good for you. It's actually going to have negative consequences for the rest of us. No, this has got to be transparent.
Exactly. Yeah, and I didn't even talk about the Senate. I won't. It sounds like
sure.
But no, you're right. I mean, I think that the pressure on transparency, it almost shows you how, like, deal making sometimes can't be transparent, or at least not in the current politics we have. But anyway, all this just to say that, like, I think that what the process that we saw was I think very tinged by how can we position off of this, how can we make the other side look bad. The eventual map, Republicans have been talking again and again about how they've chosen a citizens map. I will often, the reason I gave that really long intro to the map is because I think there's some key context that just calling it a citizen map misses. Like, let alone the Amanda Holt stuff. It's the zero population deviation and the sudden changes they made when their members said they couldn't vote for it. That, to me, show you that, like, they can call it a citizens map, but, like, petty politics still influence its shape. And that's exactly what the advocates said they didn't want.
Right. And, we should be clear, too, like, a citizens map is different than, like, an independent commission, right? And just calling it a citizens map. And also, like, my neighbor's a citizen, too. Right. I mean, so, and my neighbor has no experience doing any kind of mapping. Right. So, I mean, by calling it that, it gives it a veneer of, like, somehow it's an open process. But I mean, that seemed to me, like, from the beginning, just kind of a ridiculous move to be able to kind of, hang a map on and say, well, look, it was like it's drawn by city. Well, it wasn't actually. It was drawn by someone who actually has kind of, I mean, we could say Amanda Holt is, she's an expert, right, in this stuff. I mean, she might not be like who we put the crown on, the expert queen in the country or something like this, but she's done this work, as you said. So, she's like a participant in the process. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But to try to kind of get around this whole transparency thing, but say, oh, look, the citizens map, this is the most open thing that we've ever seen, and this is why this map should move forward. It's just kind of, it just seems more like political gamesmanship than anything else at this point.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll just add too is, like, on that congressional map is, like, it was picked without Democratic input at all too. Is the other thing I should really point out. It's like, the map passed in the House without a single Democratic vote. It passed in the Senate without a single Democratic vote. The Democratic chairman, like the counterpart to Seth Grove, the guy who ran the process in the House, was this guy Scott Conklin, representative from Center County, and he was like, they did not give us access to the map submission software. We just had no role in that. That was entirely the majority. And, if the idea was this transparent process where everybody can kind of have a say, The House didn't do that, and then when they tried it in the Senate, as you said, it blew up.
Right.
Like a draft leaked. Democrats were really mad about it, or some Democrats, like, because Street seemed to have drawn his own district. Also, the draft map that had that, like, I think that, like, crazy Western PA district that, like, snaked around.
Yeah.
And look, it was a draft. It was a draft. And, like, all the conversation at the time is, like, we were going to fix that. Like, that was not at all a serious proposal. Like, we're going to make those lines clearer. But you know, like, they tried, and the idea was they will come to some compromise, but like, my understanding of what happened there is, like, basically both chairs got put under pressure.
Yep.
Republicans thought it was too bad of a deal for them to be able to say they passed, and same thing. Democrats went to Sharif Street and said, "You're selling us out to get your own district." And Dave Argel, the Republican, and Sharif Street, the Democrat, were just like, "We don't want this pressure. We were just trying to come up with some bipartisan agreement, and both sides are just hitting us for it. So you know what? Fine, send it to the courts."
Right, send it to the courts. Oh, God. All right, so let's take us up to right before this got sent to the Supreme Court, right? This is, again, another thing I get a bunch of questions about, just trying for clarification. So we got to say Pennsylvania's got these two courts, right? You've got the Commonwealth Court and you've got the state Supreme Court, or, you know, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And we had one of the maps, right, was chosen by Commonwealth Court Judge Patricia McCullough, right, who basically said last Friday, right, the 7th, I think, is when she said, okay, look, we're going to put forward a suggestion, what we think the Supreme Court should consider. And it's this kind of Republican, like, proposed map. And the reason why that this is the one that they should choose, it's because it's the one that's representative of citizens, right? And they produced this big report that's going forward there. One, what's the role of the Commonwealth Court there? And two, what does that actually mean that she's put forward this recommendation?
So that map that she picked was was the congressional map passed by the House. I spent all that time introing. So that is the map. That's also why I think it's So McCullough's role in this is entirely advisory. So, like, the state Supreme Court took up the case. Like, this was a case filed by a Democratic redistricting group, like, just saying, like, we don't think that anyone's going to reach a compromise, so the court should just pick it. And so the courts finally took up that case after multiple tries by lawyers to get it in front of them quicker, but they took their time, and the court just sort of the court said, "Hey, Patricia McCullough, because you've been hearing this case in the lower court, we want you to serve as this thing called a special master, who, like, courts typically appoint in redistricting cases, and their job is basically just to, like, summarize all the evidence and put it into, like, legalese for the judges, who typically are not cartographers, but, you know, law professors." So, like, it's a recommendation, and I mean, I think anyone who wants to take umbrage with it can. You know, the fact is, like, you know, McCullough was the judge who did side with the Trump campaign, you know, gave them one of their only brief legal victories before the Supreme Court struck it down. Like there are a lot of reasons.
And that was to block, let's be clear, that was to block the certification of the 2020 election, right?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Like that was a big case. It was quickly overturned. But, you know, like it's just a suggestion. The 7 justices of the Supreme Court, 5 of whom are liberal, 2 of whom are conservative, they're going to come up with whatever they think the best decision is. They're going to hear arguments Friday. Like, what McCullough said is just a suggestion. There's a bunch of maps they could pick from. I want to say there's 13 in all. And, you know, just it's a suggestion that they pick the Republicans' map.
Excellent. So it doesn't have any kind of weight. Doesn't have like legal precedent or something like this going forward. It is a suggestion and it's a recommendation based upon what the previous court said. That's kind of
well, to be clear, yeah, like McCullough has her legal reasons, and you can read the whole report. But yeah, like it is the court is not bound. The high court, the Supreme Court, is not bound to take that suggestion. Right. Like they will come up with their own legal reasoning after hearing the legal arguments.
Excellent. Okay, so one other question about before we get to the state legislative maps, which I'm really fascinated with what's going to happen here. But so Pennsylvania has lost a seat, right? A House seat, right? We went from 18 to 17. So to what degree do you think that is going to have an impact on these maps, or what do you think the impact will be of moving there? Do you think there's anything kind of significant? Does this seem to be part of what's I don't know, fanning the flames of some of the stuff around these maps, or is it just something that we don't need to be paying that much attention to?
I mean, I'm not a political scientist. Like, I can say, like, in terms of, like, it makes it harder because someone has to lose. Like, somebody has to lose their seat. Like, Pennsylvania is kind of a little set up for that because like, Connor Lamb's running for Senate, so theoretically he could lose his seat and it will be fine. That just makes it hard because you have to yank the seat out from someone, which I think just was another factor why Wolf and the General Assembly couldn't come to an agreement. And then, other than that, I mean, I don't know. I know political scientists and like some insiders say, "Oh, this means Pennsylvania has less influence in the Capitol," and like, I'm not in a position to agree or disagree with that. I've heard that argument, and that it's just another variable. It's another variable that made redistricting very complicated.
100%. Okay, now this kind of ties into both, kind of like a transition to where we're going to talk about with the state legislative maps. So this going to the Supreme Court. Now, all the maps are going to the Supreme Court, correct?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court is picking the congressional map, and the Supreme Court now, because the legislative maps were finally approved last Friday, I'm trying to remember, like 2 Fridays ago, they will now be hearing legal challenges on those maps. They could dismiss them all. They could ask for the map be changed. They could order like a whole bunch of other variables could start there. But like what it appears is that the Supreme Court will be hearing those arguments of what people want out of the maps in the next month or so.
Right. So, and that is not what will be happening on Friday, the 18th. That is strictly for the congressional maps, correct?
Correct. And I just realized the other thing I should point out is that what we did see last week from the court is noticing the fact that, it is February. Candidates for office are supposed to be getting candidates for office are supposed to be getting their petitions, like what they have to go and get signatures so they can appear on the ballot. That's supposed to start, I think it's tomorrow. Yeah, that was supposed to start tomorrow. Supreme Court just handed down this very brief order last week that said, hey, just suspend it all for right now while we figure this out, because how can you figure out where you're going to run if you don't have frickin' districts?
Yeah, and I think that, I think I saw, as soon as that order came down, I think I saw Summer Lee kind of tweet out, it's like, well, we're kind of in a holding pattern now. We're still kind of going out, and, you can't, obviously, if you don't have a district that is set in stone, you don't know where you're going to be. How can you gather really petitions without having it all kind of thrown out? I was even looking at, for example, I live in Percy, right? And my district, I think we're like the 145th now or something, but on the new maps, right, Percy goes from a town that is connected to kind of northern Bucks County, where Quakertown is, and kind of the surrounding district of Palisades, right? And then in the new maps, it's like you have this little bubble that's Percy, then it's Percy South on Hilltown Township. So if you're a potential candidate in that area, right, there wouldn't even be any possible way that you could gather signatures and know what they would count without causing a huge legal mess down the road. So I guess it makes sense that the court basically said, hey, put this on hold because we really need to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't think they had a lot of other options. Yeah. There already was a case like working its way up to the courts that was because the petition timeline, I believe, like was already, everyone knew it was in doubt because of the congressional maps not being picked. The people who redraw the state house maps have done what they needed to do, just maybe a little later than everyone would have liked. But so there was a separate lawsuit already working the way up saying, hey, court, can you suspend the petition timelines for legislative maps so these maps can be implemented? And that was already there. So the court just said, let's make this easy. No petitions until we figure out what the heck is going on.
So I'm sorry, now I'm getting in the weeds, I know, but like, so
please.
Is there a reason, or is that petition gathering, like, period, does that have to be the same for congressional candidates and for state legislative candidates? Or
I am not an attorney.
No, you don't know.
Okay.
Just curious, because I know that we said earlier, right? They for the state legislative maps, they have until March 6th, right, to actually file kind of legal challenges to the maps. So theoretically, we could have a decision from the Supreme Court about the congressional maps, say next week, right? Which
Yeah.
is before March 6th, right? So they
Yep.
could have that resolved, but you still don't know if there's going to be more legal challenges coming for the state legislative map. So
Exactly.
you're still in that same situation when it comes to petition gathering.
Exactly. Like it's all kind of up in the air. Like I almost feel bad because like I don't want to say anything that I'm not sure of. I know you're not
Sure.
asking me to.
No.
I'm just saying.
That's why I'm having you on, man.
Yeah,
Seriously.
like a lot of it is just uncertain. Like a lot of it's just kind of like watch the
Yep.
Supreme Court's docket. I mean, I know I'm going to be. A lot of reporters are going to be. They're going to resolve a lot of this stuff. Oh, and then another bit of uncertainty too. I'm just thinking of is like Act 77, which or the mail-in ballot law, which was struck down.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay,
let's go here. I was going to wait till after legislative, but let's talk about it right now since you brought it up, because this is the other thing. I'll tell you, I was, talking to some folks who are in my ward, right? And this is one of the concerns that they have, right? They're like, we don't know what the impact is going to be, what is actually going to happen at the precinct level, right? About what's going to happen with these mail-in ballots, because they're trying to even get their head around Act 77 and what's ultimately going to happen. I've got my little thing in the mail saying, hey, how do you want to vote? Do you want to vote mail in, or do you want to vote here? But that's still in the courts still, right?
Yes. So my understanding, I've talked to one county elections official right after the decision came down. Like the fact is, it was already stayed. Like basically the rules of Pennsylvania judiciary mean that if Governor Tom Wolf or the governor appeals anything that's goes against them, the impact of that decision is just stayed. It's just put off. It just does not matter. And that's what happened here. So yes, that decision is kind of sort of there, but unless the state Supreme Court affirms it, which seems like an if, I think there is maybe from what I've talked to, the people I've talked to, most are pretty sure it will be overturned, but there is apparently there might be a small chance, because
let's be clear here. So we're saying when it should be overturned, we mean the overturning would then allow for mail-in ballots, correct?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. So I'm clear. Most people believe that the lower court's determination that Act 77 is unconstitutional will not be agreed to by. I've still made that more confusing. Just that ruling.
But this is the problem. Because it is confusing for people, and I think that's what's got a lot of anxiety levels up, because trying to figure out, okay, what exactly was found as unconstitutional, what's going to happen if it's overturned. So
I think the easiest way I can say it is just it is highly likely everyone who wants to vote by mail will be able to vote by mail, but you once again just always have to keep open. But there's always a chance. Nobody knows how these courts are going to rule. There's always a chance though that the right majority aligns and they actually uphold that decision, and Act 77 is unconstitutional. But sort of until we have that decision, this is why I'm emphasizing just keep watching the courts.
Right.
Nothing's going to change. That decision won't have any impact until the high court makes the decision. So it's just kind of wait and see what the high court does.
Excellent. Got it, everybody? So legitimately, that anxiety that people feel because they're not sure, right? Okay. It's likely it's going to overturn, maybe, but we don't know for sure. So that is just going to be an open question until we actually have the court decision. So that's just going to be part of the world we live in, right?
Pretty much. It's uncertainty. Isn't that the problem of living?
Yes, exactly indeed. All right, good. So, okay, so we've got that. We've got the mail-in ballot stuff. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening at the state legislative maps. So the state legislative maps, just again, so that everybody's clear with what we're talking about, these are kind of our representatives that go to our state legislature, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't go to DC, they go to Harrisburg, right? So what does that picture look like at this time? Because these maps were less controversial, right? I mean, they passed by a 4-1.
Yeah. So
let me put it this way: they were more bipartisan. That's the different thing than saying less controversial. Okay.
Yeah. That is technically correct. Sorry, that's not shade at you. I'm thinking about it because
I appreciate the clarity of the fine point there, because you're absolutely right.
So I think half of it is because I really specifically focus on the House, and I honestly think the House map, the how to draw the 203 districts of just the Pennsylvania State House of Representatives has maybe been the most controversial thing of this entire process.
Really?
Even more, but then the state Senate has kind of been one of the least controversial, unless you talk to real insiders, but I will not even get into that. I'll just say, like, the state Senate map came together pretty easily. Mark Nordenberg, who chairs the... Okay, there's a commission. It's made up of 5 people. It's supposed to draw these state house maps. It's chaired by this guy, Mark Nordenberg, who's the former chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh, my alma mater, Hair to Pitt. Nordenberg basically let the 2 Senate leaders, the Democrat Jay Costa and the Republican Kim Ward, go into a back room and draw their own map. So when I say it's not controversial, it's certainly controversial to people who don't want insiders dictating the process. But in terms of institutionally, it was very easy because Jay Costa and Kim Ward just sat across from each other and said, I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this. Here's our map. Bingo. The House map is the exact opposite because Joanna McClinton, the Democratic leader, and Kerry Benninghoff, the Republican leader, could not get along. And each side will blame the other for that. But they couldn't, and it left a lot of the drawing for Mark Nordenberg, and he actually brought on his own mapper. This has never happened before.
And who's Mark Nordenberg, just so everybody knows?
He's the chairman of the commission, as I said. He's like the former Pitt chancellor. It left Mark Nordenberg, Chairman Nordenberg, to just draw the map himself, more or less, with his own mapper. And this has like never happened before in this whole commission, which has existed since the 1960s. And Nordenberg took some input from both sides, and then just his mapper drew a map. And this map started, I want to say it's because of retirements and redraws, it's gone down, but it literally put like 15, 16 incumbents against each other, which is a very large number of sitting lawmakers, forced them in the same district. Most of them were Republicans, but there were some Democrats, and it just dramatically changed huge parts of this map, and it's caused a lot of controversy. And that's because, it sounds like you have another question there. Let me stop my brain there.
Well, we're talking about, say, the because there's layers of controversy here, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
there's one layer of controversy which has to do. Let's just talk. We'll start with the broadest level, about what it looks like to have a kind of a more of a transparent process where there's kind of input to the process where it's coming to an agreement. So that you've already kind of addressed that. That really kind of didn't happen, right? That just didn't happen. Then you have a second layer of controversy, which has more to do with the kind of, say, the careers of politicians.
Yes.
Right. Rather than the representation of different groups in Pennsylvania or different people in Pennsylvania, right? Mm-hmm. And that's I should say that's not mutually exclusive, right? So it's not just saying, but you have politicians whose job it is now are suddenly in a position where they thought they were safe, and now they're going to be in a situation where they're one of them is going to lose their job, right? Or they're going to have to run in a district which they don't have the name recognition or haven't done the work in. Mm-hmm. And then there's a third layer, right, which actually has to do with which constituencies are broken up in these, in these new maps, right? What happens in, the Lehigh Valley? What happens in kind of districts in Philadelphia or outside Pittsburgh? Those seem to be and there's probably more layers than that, but those seem to be at least 3 of the layers. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and I think, to jump into that last layer, that's the one where a lot of the partisan shifts in this map happen, because Democrats would get a chance. They'd get a higher floor from this new map of seats in the General Assembly, mm-hmm. because what this map does is it splits State College, it splits Harrisburg, it splits Lancaster, it splits Reading an extra time, it splits Allentown extra time. All these extra splits mean there's extra Democratic seats in a lot of places where there used to just be one Democratic seat, because all those Democratic voters in, these bright blue cities in central Pennsylvania were forced into the minimum number of districts. This map proposes adding extra splits to, and that will create a more proportional map. So Democrats, will have a higher number of seats that kind of more equal to the fact that Democrats make up about half the state regularly when you just look at statewide total. of votes. And but why that's complicated is because when you introduce those splits, you are all those cities I mentioned are, if not majority minority, pretty darn close. And you are potentially violating federal law and like just like a lot of statutes that say like minority votes have to be protected. So the main, it becomes this debate over what's the best way to draw maps in communities of color so that a Latino voter in Lancaster or a black voter in Harrisburg really is able to choose the representative who suits them instead of like having their vote diluted.
And this is, I think, a fascinating. This I find extraordinarily fascinating, and some of the discussions around it. Like, I mean, you reported on this. Kind of, we see some kind of Latino leaders in the Lehigh Valley are thinking about filing a lawsuit because they're finding that their district, just what you explained is happening there in the Lehigh Valley, and in particular that there is some kind of prominent kind of Hispanic Latino leaders kind of in the area who are kind of carved where they live. It would be carved out of one of these new districts, which means they don't have kind of established political presence there, and a whole bunch of stuff gets played out. So on the one hand, there's those questions, and you have Manny Guzman, right, who's been coming out and saying like, look, this is actually not a bad thing in the way these districts are being divided up. It means it has an opportunity to kind of build coalition, and this seems to be like one of these pressures that we see. This is not just in Pennsylvania, we should be clear, right? This is stuff that's happening kind of across the country in many ways, but in Pennsylvania seems particularly acute, where you've got like, on the one hand, you could say we're going to kind of set up this district as to be like, this is going to be a kind of a Latino district, right? And that means that, you're basically going to have an overwhelming, you're guaranteed you're going to have Latino representation here. And then, but the flip side of that is you allow, say, Republicans, right, to kind of pack the district. Right. And so therefore, then you give this one kind of Latino district, right? But then that means you got two white Republican districts that are around it, right? Which may not be as good representative. Where if you're splitting them up, right? And I was looking at some of the numbers, like just like in the Lehigh Valley, for example, the percentages were like, if I could find it here real quick. So they're saying these new districts, right? You have like the 22nd, the newly one there is like, it's 53% Hispanic, 33% white. The other one is a 49 or 38% Hispanic and 49% white. And the last one is 15% Hispanic and 69% white. So you see these three districts. So there's a potential for like there to be two Latino seats that come out of that, right, with kind of coalition as opposed there. And I think that seems to be some of the political calculations that a lot of, say, community-based organizations and people on the ground are trying to figure out right now. Is it better to kind of keep a safe seat that's going to represent, say, Latinos or African Americans, or you want to try to build and kind of broaden out this kind of coalition and take the risk of actually losing that seat?
Yeah, and I that is the debate. It's sort of a really high level debate. I mean, what I think has to be introduced is Republicans are really championing the argument of like, no, like you need to keep these, like you need to draw them line so that it's like a 70% Latino seat. We can, Democrats are just pointing out the fact that like Republicans have often ignored sometimes minority issues, like they will counter. They have other issues that matter to them, but like stuff like policing reform only advanced in the General Assembly in 2020 when Black Democrats literally had a protest on the House floor in the middle of the George Floyd protest, and that finally passed a bill. One bill. There's still a lot of other bills that haven't been advanced. An issue like driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants has been sitting in the General Assembly, hasn't moved for a couple of sessions, despite some bipartisan interest in it, including from some Republicans you might not expect, but just, issue hasn't moved. Like, I hate to pull those two out, but just like Republicans have certainly have a mixed record on race and identity in American politics.
Oh, I don't even think that it's a controversial statement at this point, right? I mean,
yeah,
right.
I'm just trying to be careful, but this just say, and all of a sudden, and all of a sudden, there is this sudden interest in protecting these communities when to split them would also cut into the number of seats Republicans have.
Right.
And I think that is also why we're going to hear so much about the racial dynamics of these maps.
Yes.
Because it is a readily an easily made argument that also, like, what are we in right now but this age of so many people thinking about identity and race and ethnicity more and more and more than ever, and when Republicans can reach for this argument and say, like, well, look, like, and I, once again, I'm saying, like, I think there's a very legitimate conversation to be had here. I've talked to Victor Martinez, I've talked to black leaders in Harrisburg. There are people who aren't happy about these lines and they need to be heard out. But, you know, half the reason we're hearing it is because the way these maps are drawn are cutting in the Republicans' edge in the state house.
Absolutely. And I think that what I find also interesting, and I know this is not as prominent as just what you just said, right? The reason why this is getting so much attention is because, you know, Republicans are going to be losing seats, right, under these maps. But the other aspect of this, which I find really fascinating, is because this bargain of, say, you know, packing a district, right, to make sure that 70% Latino, for example, right, to guarantee that you got that seat, right, has been also, I've heard, this is not this election cycle, but this is something that I've heard consistently among kind of, say, activist-oriented folks, right, is that, you know, the reluctance to give up those seats, right, even if it means more Democratic seats, is because there's been an ongoing tension even within the Democratic Party. Right. So you've got some folks who think like, oh, great, now we're going to get kind of two majority minority districts. Right. This is great for the Democrats. And those folks are like, wait, not so fast.
Yeah.
Right. Not so fast. There's no, you know, you need to you can't just assume that these are just going to be these D seats for you. Right. Because, you know, part of what has allowed our issues to get front and center has been this particular guarantee, because, you know, Democrats don't have, you know, I don't want to paint too broad of a brush here, but I'm saying part of that tension, right? Like race has been an issue across Americans, like the American political spectrum, not simply only Republicans. And it plays out differently in Democratic politics. But I think that this is kind of one of these, you know, coming to fruition, especially as you see the energy coming out of, you know, say Black Lives Matter protests or around the George Floyd protests, as you see kind of young activists that have been getting involved in kind of like, you know, in these communities of color and are kind of making different kinds of demands. There's going to be, I think, ongoing tensions with those voices and the Democrats' assumptions about who's going to be in their camp. I mean, this is just my analysis. I'm not asking you to kind of like, you know, agree with it necessarily, but, you know, that's kind of how I see some of those tensions coming out.
Yeah, I think that these new districts, like that is, I mean, the concern that I've heard from community advocates, and like, well, I'll use Harrisburg. This is where I live.
Sure.
You know, like the splitting of Harrisburg does create this new majority minority district that includes most of a very historically black neighborhood, Allison Hill, as well as some neighborhoods that have very growing Latino populations. It then sticks them into, and there's also one other like sort of suburb of the city, which is a small city that is also, I think, majority black. But also then adds a majority white. It's diversifying, but a majority white suburb to sort of round out it. So like it's majority minority, but it's like not majority black, not majority Latino. It's probably like 55%, maybe even less than that. Minority voters who have to vote in coalition to try it if they want their candidate to beat a white Democrat from the suburbs, who then probably isn't really going to know Allison Hill all that well. And that's what I think is what so much of this comes down to, is like that inner party dynamic is also important, because like, you know, will a Democrat who grew up in suburbia then be able to go represent an inner city? I mean, ideally, hopefully, yes. But I also think we have lots of examples of that not happening, and lots of people who have well-placed fears of what happens if they do not.
Right, exactly. And I think that, you know, I'm like, this is my, you know, again, the I'll bring in my hopefulness here, at least from a kind of social movement perspective, is, you know, part of what makes this difficult right now is the time is so condensed, right? I mean, you've got, you know, the primaries coming up. At least at this point, they say they're not moving them, but, you know, they're coming up on May 17th. You got petition gathering and all this stuff, so puts all these questions in, you know, like a crucible, which I don't see them possibly getting all answered at this point. On the flip side of that, when it comes to kind of organizational or kind of social movement politics, this opens up a kind of a new chapter potentially, right? If it comes up, it's like, okay, if we really want to talk about coalition, we're actually going to have to do the hard work of working in coalition. Because I don't think we're at a time anymore where there's going to be people that are going to sit idly by and say, oh, well, I guess we're going to let the white suburban guy, you know, allow to represent us. I don't think that's going to fly so much anymore. But
I can definitely tell you that's something that I will be trying to watch closely once the new maps are implemented and we see what the races look like.
man, that's fantastic. Well, listen, so here we got great. Thank you so much for taking the time to do all this kind of breakdown. I feel it's invaluable in so many levels. Well, let me ask you: is there anything that we should be paying attention to, which we haven't had a chance to take a look at, or other things that you want to add, especially as we are kind of looking forward to waiting to see what the Supreme Court is going to be saying?
Honestly, I don't want to confuse listeners. I'm not trying to say that, like, I have trouble keeping this all straight.
Yeah.
So, like, literally, watch the state Supreme Court. Myself and a lot of other reporters are going to be, see what they do. But look, yeah, congressional maps, they're picking. We might have a decision on that within a week or so. Legislative maps, challenges are still out. We won't know what they all are until early March, and then the Supreme Court makes their decisions then. In the meantime, petitions for candidates to get on the ballot, that's kind of just paused. The court will make their decision. There was a recommendation that they be condensed to 2 weeks, but like I said, that was just a recommendation. What the court does is up to the state Supreme Court. And then finally, vote by mail. State Supreme Court will make a decision. But in the meantime, it seems counties are just going to keep acting like that decision didn't happen because it doesn't have the force of law until the state Supreme Court decides what they're going to do. So I'm sorry that is to leave listeners with uncertainty, but that is all I have. That is all that's in stock. Supply chain issues. Sorry.
No, but the uncertainty in this case is clarity, because it says like, no, we're uncertain because there's a good reason to be, right? It's not, haven't missed something or something like that. We're still waiting for kind of a series of things to come down. Well, hey, man, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time out. And I hope that, down the road sometime, I'd love to have you back on to kind of when we have some updates and especially as we kind of get closer to the 2022 election.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for your time, Kevin. Be happy to come back on.
All right, fantastic. Well, hey everybody, thank you for tuning in today. And I know I'm going to get in floods of responses that are going to be coming in to the email and stuff like this, and I will probably be bugging Stephen a little bit on this one afterwards and say, hey, yeah, what could be a clarification on this? But hey, man, I appreciate your time, and thank you so much for the reporting and for sorting this stuff out for me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Thank you all for tuning in today. And I want to remind you, we've got a special show coming on tonight at 7 p.m. our normal time with Diana Lagermans. We're talking about what's happening here in Bucks County, Central Bucks, canceling field trips. Oh, my God. We'll talk to you later on tonight. See ya.
I guess I'll fly.